He forged my name and carved up my farm like I was already dead. Ryan's voice rang in my ears as I stared at the county recorder's blueprints. My name, gone. My deed, not found. My family's land, sliced into neat boxes with my cousins' names on top. But that wasn't the worst part. They'd forged my signature, sold off our legacy while I was knee-deep in February snow-pulling calves, said I'd agreed to it, smirked in my face as they showed me the paper trail they'd manufactured. But they forgot one thing. I was trained by the man who documented every inch of this land. I had something they didn't count on, proof buried deeper than their lies, and when I found it, they'd wish the storm had taken me first. My name is Michael Whitaker, and I'm 45 years old. I measure my days by the rhythm of planting and harvest on our 200-acre farm, where every fence post tells a story written in my family's sweat. My cousin Ryan and the others traded their work boots for golf shoes years ago, though they never miss a chance to remind me how quaint my lifestyle is. Grandfather Walter taught me everything, from mending fences to keeping meticulous records of every transaction and boundary line. Those dusty files and stamped receipts fill 3 filing cabinets in the barn office, each document as precisely organized as the man himself was. My shoulders tense when I think how the cousins' eyes gleam lately during family dinners, their sudden interest in our heritage rising with the land values. But let me start from the beginning. I'd spent all afternoon getting ready for the family dinner, something we did every few months to keep the peace. The roast was perfect, the potatoes creamy, and even the green beans had that snap grandmother used to pride herself on. You know, the kind of meal where everything comes together just right? Yeah. That was before Ryan showed up with that damn folder tucked under his arm. The first warning should have been how he barely touched his food. Ryan always ate like a combine at harvest. But that night he just pushed his potatoes around, checking his watch every few minutes. I caught him trading looks with our other cousins, Mark and Steve, who sat there wearing grins that reminded me of coyotes sizing up a henhouse. We were just about to clear for dessert when Ryan tapped his water glass with a spoon. The sound cut through the dining room like a hammer on steel, making my wife Sarah jump a little in her chair. Before we wrap up, Ryan said, sliding that folder onto the table, there's some family business we need to discuss. He spread out papers like he was dealing cards. Michael, we've done some digging, and well, the farm isn't yours. Grandpa left it to all of us. My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. That's not possible. The will had been clear as day. I remembered every word, every line. Grandfather had signed it right there in the kitchen, the air thick with coffee and motor oil from the tractor he'd been working on that morning. I was there when he made it official. Things change, Ryan said, sliding a document across to me. Take a look. I picked up the paper, and something felt off right away. The staples were too bright, too new. The letterhead wasn't the same as the one our family lawyer had used for decades. My stomach knotted as I scanned paragraph after paragraph of legal jargon, all of it pointing to one conclusion. Somehow, they were trying to claim an equal share of everything. This is bullshit, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And you know it. Mark leaned forward, elbows on my good tablecloth. Come on, Michael. Be reasonable. The subdivision offers we're getting? We could all retire on what that land's worth. Clean money, quick sale, everyone wins. Everyone except the legacy grandfather built. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood. First thing tomorrow, I'm heading to the county recorder's office. Every one of these papers is getting verified. By all means, Ryan said. But that smirk never left his face. These guys had never spent a single day mending fence wire or pulling calves in February snow, but here they sat, acting like they had any right to what our grandfather had entrusted to me. Sarah started gathering plates, her hands trembling slightly. I helped her clear the table while my cousins huddled around Ryan like moths to a porch light. Before they left, I managed to slip one of the documents into my pocket, a photocopy of something that looked important. In the kitchen, I carefully marked the corner with my thumbnail, making a little groove I could use to match it up later. I needed to check every seal, every date, every signature. After they finally cleared out, I set my alarm for sunrise and put my old thermos by the door. The same thermos grandfather used to fill with coffee so strong it could float a horseshoe, back when he was teaching me about property lines and easements. I kept thinking about the county recorder's office, wondering what answers would be waiting in those dusty files. What would those official records say when morning came? I pulled into the courthouse parking lot just as the sun was climbing over the grain elevators. You know that early morning quiet when even the pigeons haven't started their strutting? That's when you get things done in county offices, before the bureaucracy has a chance to wake up and complicate everything. The fluorescent lights in the records department buzzed to life as I walked in, making that familiar electric hum that always reminded me of summer moths against the porch screen. Ms. Henderson, who'd been the clerk there since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, was just unlocking the counter gate. "Well, if it isn't Michael Whitaker," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "What brings you in so early?" "Need to check some property records," I told her, trying to keep my voice casual. "The old home place." She nodded and disappeared into the back, where metal drawers scraped and papers rustled. When she returned, she was carrying a tube of blueprints that made my heart skip. She unrolled them across the counter, weighing down the corners with brass paperweights shaped like the state capitol. That's when I saw it. Our family's 200 acres carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey. Clean geometric lines split the fields into perfect rectangles, each one labeled with my cousins' names. Ryan's plot covered the south pasture where we'd always wintered the cattle. Mark had the creek bottom with the best hay ground. Steve's name sat right on top of the old barn site. "These were rezoned last quarter," Ms. Henderson said, running her finger along a legend in the corner. "Approved for residential development." My mouth went dry. There has to be some mistake. I need to see the original deed, the one that puts it all in my name. She clicked through her computer, frowning at the screen. "That's odd. The original deed's listed as not found in our system." She looked up at me over those reading glasses. "You might want to get this sorted quickly, Michael. With ownership unclear, you could be looking at foreclosure proceedings in 30 days if the property taxes or title status isn't resolved." 30 days. The words hit me like a hammer to the sternum. I pulled out my notebook and started copying down parcel numbers, making sure Ms. Henderson stamped and dated each page of my notes. Something wasn't adding up. The filing timestamps, the ink colors on the seals, even the paper quality looked too perfect. Anyone who'd spent time in county offices knows real documents have character. Coffee stains, creased corners, that sort of thing. "I'd like to request a certified record search," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the vice grip tightening around my chest. "Full history on all these parcels." "Of course." She started filling out forms. "It'll take a few days to process." I pulled out my pocket planner, the same one grandfather had given me years ago for tracking breeding schedules, and circled a date 30 days out. The paper trembled slightly under my pen. When I stepped outside, it was almost noon. The courthouse square was filling up with the usual crowd of lawyers and title company runners. Dust devils spiraled up from the base of the flagpole, and I couldn't help seeing them as miniature versions of the subdivisions my cousins were probably dreaming up. All those fence lines I'd mended, every post hole I'd dug with grandfather, transformed into cookie-cutter cul-de-sacs. I needed to get home and go through every box in the attic, every file in grandfather's old roll-top desk. There had to be something. A duplicate deed, survey records, anything that could prove what I knew in my bones was true. But one question kept nagging at me as I walked to my truck. Whose signature had given away our fields? Because it sure as hell wasn't mine. Ever try organizing 50 years of paperwork spread across your kitchen floor? Let me tell you, it's like putting together one of those 1,000-piece puzzles where half the pieces are receipts, and the other half are coffee-stained notes your grandfather wrote in handwriting that'd make a doctor proud. I'd hauled down every banker box from the attic, each one labeled in grandfather's precise block letters. Taxes 1975, 1980, equipment receipts, property records. The cardboard was soft at the corners, and that musty paper smell took me right back to Sunday afternoons watching him sort documents at the kitchen table, teaching me the importance of keeping everything in its place. Right there in the middle of my sorting system, I found what I was looking for. Grandfather's will, the one naming me sole heir. The pages were still crisp, like they'd been waiting for this moment. I slipped them into a fresh plastic sleeve, handling them like the precious proof they were. But proof needs lawyers, and lawyers need money. I spent the next hour on the phone, each call more discouraging than the last. The first attorney wanted $5,000 just to look at the case. The second quoted $8,000. The third at least had the decency to sound apologetic when he mentioned his retainer. "You're looking at $15,000 minimum to fight this, Mr. Whitaker," he said. "These property disputes get complicated fast." I sat there with my cold meatloaf from last night's disaster dinner, pencil stuck behind my ear, calculating what I could sell. The cattle trailer might bring $4,000. I could part with some of the yearling stock, but that'd hurt come spring. Every option felt like cutting off a finger to save the hand. Instead of dwelling on what I couldn't afford, I started drafting a timeline, probate date, tax payments, every official interaction I could remember. Something caught my eye. A cluster of filings all dated right after last harvest, when I'd spent 3 solid weeks up in the north pasture replacing broken drainage tiles. Convenient timing that. The phone rang around 3 o'clock. County number. My stomach dropped before I even answered. "Mr. Whitaker," a woman said, all business. "This is Susan Martinez from the Zoning Board Supervisor's office. We've reviewed your inquiry about the recent rezoning application. And, sir, the paperwork carries your signature. Perhaps you forgot. It was processed through proper channels last quarter." "My signature?" The words came out rough. "That's impossible. I never signed anything. I'm looking at it right now. Would you like me to email you a copy?" "Please." My printer hummed a minute later, spitting out the document that was supposed to be my death warrant. There it was, a signature that could have fooled most people. But I'd been signing my name the same way since high school, and this wasn't it. The R in particular. The forger had looped it full and round, while mine always had a sharp corner. Someone had stolen my name. Someone who thought they knew me well enough to copy my signature, but not well enough to get it right. I closed the box. I'd been sorting and checked my watch. The county offices would be open for another hour. Just enough time to drive back and look Susan Martinez in the eye while she explained how a forgery made it through those proper channels of hers. The real question wasn't how they'd done it. That was clear enough. What I needed to know was whose hand had held the pen. Because somebody's fingers had wrapped around a ballpoint and deliberately signed away my birthright, thinking I was too busy with honest work to notice. You want to know the worst part? Deep down, I already had a pretty good idea who it was. But sometimes you need to see the proof with your own eyes, even when the truth feels like swallowing barbed wire. I pulled into the county building's parking lot with 20 minutes until closing. The late afternoon sun hit the windows at that angle that turns every pane into a mirror, like the whole place was hiding behind a mask of light. My notepad, grandfather's will copy, and an old photo of his gun safe rode in my jacket pocket. Proof that we'd always been careful with our records. The department head's office felt like stepping into a freezer, though maybe that was just the chill running down my spine. Ms. Martinez, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, gestured to the chair across from her desk without looking up from her computer. "I appreciate you making time," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'd like to review that rezoning document in person." She slid a paper across her desk like she was dealing cards. "As you can see, everything appears to be in order." The signature sprawled across the bottom line, fat and lazy with ink. Nothing like my quick, thin strokes that barely left an impression. Whoever had forged it had studied my signature enough to get the letters right, but missed how I actually wrote. Like someone who'd seen my name on Christmas cards but never watched me sign a check. "I'd like to see the chain of custody on these filings," I said. "Who handled the paperwork, when it was submitted, that sort of thing." Martinez's shoulders rose and fell. "That's internal process information, Mr. Whitaker. I can assure you all proper procedures were followed. Then you won't mind if I photograph these stamps and initials." I already had my phone out, capturing every mark and date I could see. Something wasn't adding up. One document was stamped at 7:45 a.m., but I knew damn well the office didn't open until 8:30. "I need to formally request an escalation on that original deed search," I said, pulling out a pre-written letter. "And this is a formal demand for document preservation. Nothing gets shredded or misplaced while this gets sorted out." She took both papers with perfectly manicured fingers, her expression never changing. "We'll process these according to standard procedure." "I'm sure you will." I stood up, tucking my phone away. Just like everything else around here. The sun was falling behind the courthouse when I hit the sidewalk, painting everything in that golden hour light that usually meant time to check the cattle. Instead, I leaned against my truck and ran the numbers again. Feed bills, property taxes, lawyer retainers. The math hadn't gotten any friendlier since morning. Ryan's words from dinner rode shotgun all the way home. "It's our shared legacy." The phrase caught in my head like a crow that wouldn't shut up. Some legacy. Forged papers and backroom deals while I was out fixing fence lines and pulling calves. I did my evening rounds through the barn, checking locks with extra care. A loose piece of tin roofing slapped in the wind. The sound like someone laughing at a joke I wasn't in on. Standing there in the growing dark, I couldn't help wondering who else might have had access to our family records. The safe in grandfather's study had been opened sometime after he passed. I remembered the scratches around the keyhole that hadn't been there before. Back in the kitchen, I pulled out my planner and stared at the red circle around. Day 26. 4 days gone already, and all I had to show for it was confirmation that someone had forged my signature and a bunch of county officials who could have taught a masterclass in looking the other way. Below the date, I wrote one word. Allie? Because that's what I needed. Someone who knew how this game was really played. Someone who'd seen how the county pushed paper around when they wanted something to disappear. Someone who wasn't my blood-betraying cousins or these stone-faced clerks with their standard procedures. The question was, who? First light painted the fence posts gold when I spotted Hank Tucker's weathered frame leaning against the property line. He'd been my neighbor longer than I could remember. Watched 3 different county boards come and go, he liked to say. These days, his son ran their operation, but Hank still walked his borders every morning like clockwork. "Heard about your trouble?" he called out as I approached. His voice was gravel over iron, earned from decades of calling cattle and arguing with bureaucrats. "Ryan showing his true colors finally, is he?" I nodded, dropping my arms onto the top rail. The wood was smooth from years of similar conversations. Got the whole county office backing his play, too. Missing deed, rezoning papers with my forged signature. Hell of a magic trick they've pulled. Hank spat into the grass. Counties love their paper trails, Mike. But they love their receipts even more than their stories. He tapped his temple with one gnarled finger. Every dime you've paid in property tax gets logged somewhere. Those archived ledgers, they outlast any politician's memory of who bought their last lunch. My breath caught. 20 years of writing checks, keeping that land current. You're saying there's records? County Annex basement. Hank's eyes crinkled. Where they keep everything too old to matter, until it matters a whole lot. Want to take a ride? The Annex was one of those Depression-era buildings that seemed to grow straight out of the courthouse square's southeast corner. Inside, the basement air hit us like old books and cheaper coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while a clerk who looked older than some of the files led us to a back room. "Tax rolls," Hank said, pointing to metal shelves that stretched into shadows. "Start with the year you took over from your grandfather." I pulled the first ledger, its spine cracking like a fresh notebook. There it was. My name, my parcel numbers, my payments stamped and dated. Year after year, regular as seasons. Not Ryan's name, not any of the cousins, just mine. "Phone out," Hank ordered. "Photograph everything. Box, numbers, shelf coordinates, every damn page that shows you paying what was due." He grabbed an index card catalog. "I'll start cross-referencing." Hope rose in my chest like spring wheat pushing through soil. Numbers didn't lie, and dates didn't play favorites. Let Ryan wave his fancy new papers. I had 2 decades of proof that I'd been treating this land as mine, paying for the privilege. "We'll need certified copies," I said, already drafting the plan in my head. "Present them as evidence, force them to correct the record. Should at least freeze that foreclosure clock while they sort it out. Main counter handles duplications." Hank was scribbling notes faster than I could track. "Get everything notarized while you're at it. Seals and signatures on every page." My hands were steady now as I logged the final coordinates. "Hank, I don't know how to thank you. This feels like finding a handhold when you're sliding down wet rock." He waved it off. "Just doing what neighbors ought to. Besides," his smile turned sharp, "I've been wanting to stick it to that zoning board since they tried telling me where I could put my grain bins." We climbed the annex steps into a gray afternoon. Rain was starting to stitch patterns across the sidewalk, but for the first time in days, I didn't feel the weather. I had a plan. I had proof. All I needed to do was get these receipts copied and certified before closing time. I checked my watch. Just enough time to make it happen. Better get moving if I want to beat their office hours. "Watch yourself at that counter," Hank warned, clapping my shoulder. "County's got more tricks than a carnival." I nodded, already counting the steps to the main building's entrance. What new obstacle would they throw up when I showed my hand? After grabbing a quick sandwich at the diner across the square, I headed back to the archives with a spring in my step. For the first time since Ryan dropped his bomb at dinner, I had solid ground under my feet. 20 years of tax receipts don't just vanish. And every one of them had my name on it. I filled out the request slips in triplicate, checking each box number twice. The clerk, different from the helpful one this morning, took them with barely a glance. "Wait here," she said, disappearing behind those metal doors that always remind me of hospital wings. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while I waited. That special kind of government building buzz that makes time feel like it's wading through molasses. I watched the minute hand tick past one marker, then another. Just when I was about to ask for a status check, a cart rolled through those swinging doors. Right box numbers, wrong contents. Where there should have been ledgers stuffed with decades of payment records, I found empty slots, clean spaces, gaps where my proof should have been. "Appears to be misfiled," the clerk said, shuffling papers without meeting my eyes. Her voice had that special tone bureaucrats use when they're reading from a script nobody wrote down. Misfiled? My voice stayed steady, but my hands wanted to shake. I was literally holding these books 3 hours ago. Here, I pulled out my phone, showing her photos of the ledger spines, clear as day with their dates and reference numbers. These exact books. This exact shelf. I'll need to get a supervisor, she said, already reaching for her desk phone. The supervisor arrived wearing a tie that probably cost more than my work boots. He looked at my photos, looked at the empty spaces, and managed to say absolutely nothing with a lot of words about security reviews and internal audits. We'll have to do a complete inventory search, he explained, straightening his tie. If you leave your number, we'll call you tomorrow with an update. Tomorrow. I glanced at my planner, where day 24 glared back at me like an accusation. 6 days burned. 24 left before Ryan's machinery could start rolling. The taste of copper filled my mouth. Same taste you get when you know a storm's about to break bad. I was already dialing Hank's number as I pushed through the front doors. He picked up on the first ring. The records are gone, I said, dropping onto the courthouse steps. Same boxes, same shelf numbers, but every ledger I photographed this morning vanished. Like they never existed. Hank's laugh wasn't amused. Somebody's been passing envelopes under tables. Ryan moves fast when money's on the line. He paused, and I could almost see him tugging his cap lower. Don't blink, Mike. You blink now, they'll say those photos could be from anywhere, anytime. I'm filing a document preservation letter tonight, I said. Email and certified mail both. Put them on notice that destroying records is a felony. Good, Hank growled. Make it formal. Make it stick. But don't expect it to scare them straight. They're playing for keeps now. I stared up at the courthouse dome. All that fancy stonework trying to look permanent and trustworthy. The afternoon sun caught its copper roof, making it shine like a new penny. Like Ryan's cufflinks at that dinner. Like all the things that gleam but don't feed cattle or fix fences. How much you figure it cost them? I asked, not really expecting an answer. To make 20 years of records disappear in 3 hours? You ever notice how ceiling fans can mark time better than any clock? That night, mine ticked like a court stenographer recording every mistake I'd made. Every second I'd spent trusting blood over paper. Every moment I'd worked the land while others worked angles. 3 a.m., and Ryan's smirk kept floating across my vision like a ghost. That satisfied little twist of his lips when he dropped the folder on my dinner table. The casual shrug from the county supervisor who'd basically admitted my signature was forged, but wouldn't call it that. The empty spaces where my tax records should have been. The bed creaked under me as I shifted, and somehow it sounded exactly like those metal filing cabinet drawers sliding shut on nothing. You know that hollow sound when something important's gone missing? Yeah, just like that. I could sell the cattle. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut, but it kept coming back. 40 head would cover a decent lawyer's retainer. I could downsize, find smaller pastures, start over somewhere else. The idea tasted like acid in my throat. Grandfather's voice echoed in my head. A man who gives up his ground gives up his standing. My phone buzzed. A text from Hank, who apparently didn't sleep either. Paper burns, he wrote. But truth leaves a trail. I grabbed an old feed sack tag from my nightstand and wrote those words down. Something about seeing them in my own handwriting made them feel more real. More like a compass than just comfort. Sitting up, I spread my notes across the quilt. 20 years of dealing with county offices teaches you their habits. Like how they love their cross-references. Their little arrows pointing from one document to another. I'd been so focused on the tax records, I'd missed the breadcrumbs. Every filing had an index. Every index had margin notes. And those notes kept pointing deeper to what Hank called the permanent records. Original surveys, boundary instruments, and property plats from before computers took over. They lived in the basement vault, behind a door heavy enough to stop a tornado. I started making lists. Book numbers. Page references. The kind of documentation that predated Ryan's rezoning scheme by decades. No point wandering blind down there. The vault keeper would want specific requests. Dawn crept through my kitchen window while I worked, cutting the table into stripes of light and shadow. Grandfather's will sat in its sleeve near my coffee cup. The inheritance clause still clear as day under the notary's seal. I traced the embossing with my thumb, feeling the raised edges that had survived all these years. My thermos was full, and my truck was warming up before the courthouse lights even came on. The plan was simple. Request vault access, stick to my list, and leave no room for misfiled excuses this time. Old records had a way of outlasting new tricks. You ever wonder if paper has a memory? If documents remember who touched them, who tried to bury them? As I drove toward town, my mind kept circling back to one question. What single piece of proof was so dangerous they hadn't dared destroy it? The sun climbed over the silos, painting everything in that clean morning light that makes truth feel possible. Somewhere in that vault, behind all that steel and concrete, I had to believe there was one document they couldn't erase. One piece of evidence that still carried Grandfather's voice, still held his meticulous attention to detail. My hands were steady on the wheel now. Sometimes you have to lose your footing before you remember where the solid ground is. Ryan and his crowd might know how to work a golf course, but I knew how to work a field, how to dig until I found what I needed. The courthouse grew larger in my windshield, its stone face just starting to catch the morning light. Time to see what the vault had been protecting all these years. The vault keeper's desk might as well have been a customs checkpoint. Phone, keys, pens, anything that could mark or damage documents, she recited, sliding a plastic tray toward me. You'd think I was trying to get into Fort Knox instead of just the county records vault, but I've learned patience in 45 years of farming. Can't rush a calf being born, can't rush a crop to ripen, and you sure can't rush a government employee who takes their job seriously. I emptied my pockets while she logged my name and the time. The air already felt different down here, cooler, with that specific kind of quiet you get when walls are thick, enough to hold back time itself. A dispenser on her desk held white cotton gloves, like the ones doctors wear, only thicker. These are mandatory, she said, handing me a pair. Follow me. The vault door swung open on hinges that probably weighed as much as my tractor. Inside, steel shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with leather-bound books that made my deed folder look like scratch paper. The spines carried dates that went back to when this was still territory, not even a proper state yet. My list of reference numbers felt like a treasure map in my gloved hands. I'd started with the master index, looking for Grandfather's name. He'd been meticulous about property records. Something about growing up during the Dust Bowl had made him almost obsessive about proving what ground belonged to who. The index led me to a survey book that predated all this rezoning nonsense by at least 40 years. I could smell the tannin coming off the leather binding as I lifted it from the shelf, that sharp, clean scent that old books get when they're stored right. Dust motes danced in the fluorescent light as I carried it to the reading table. Each page was protected by tissue-thin paper that crackled like fall leaves when I turned it. And there it was, Grandfather's distinctive handwriting, tight and precise as surveyor's marks. The boundary narrative filled nearly a whole page, every meet and bound laid out in language that would hold up in any court, beginning at the iron pin set at the northeast corner of Section 23. But it was the next page that made my breath catch. A full survey plat, drawn in ink that still looked fresh, showing every corner, every monument, every natural boundary of our 200 acres. Grandfather's certification stamp sat in the bottom, right corner, clear as the day he'd pressed it. Next to it, a notary seal had bitten deep enough into the paper that you could feel the impression from both sides. "Ma'am," I called to the clerk, keeping my voice steady. "Could you help me verify something?" She came over, and I pointed to the notary commission number. She pulled a register from a nearby shelf, checked the number, and nodded. That commission was valid from 1962 to 1966. "Everything appears to be in order. I'd like certified copies, please. 3 sets. The photocopier hummed, spitting out exact duplicates of both the narrative and the plat. The clerk took each one and pressed a raised seal into the corner, the modern equivalent of that old notary stamp, but just as legally binding. The embossing made a soft chunk sound that felt like victory. My hands were shaking a little as I slid the copies into a rigid document sleeve. But my eyes were rock steady when I signed out at the desk. The vault keeper handed back my phone and keys, and I stepped into late afternoon sunlight that hit me like a wake-up call. The wind had shifted while I was underground. Instead of that hot, dry blow that had been feeding the storm clouds all week, this breeze came cool from the north, carrying the kind of clean air that makes farmers think about planting. Standing there, on the courthouse steps, holding proof that was older than Ryan's entire golf career, I couldn't help but smile. You can forge a signature on a new document, sure. You can even make records disappear if you know the right palms to grease. But try erasing a properly recorded survey that's been sitting in a vault since before you were born. I patted the document sleeve. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. Probably Hank, wondering how the vault search had gone. But I didn't need to answer just yet. First, I wanted to savor this moment, when the truth had finally surfaced from under 40 years of dust. Morning hit like a shot of black coffee. I'd spent half the night organizing papers until every document had its place in a 3-ring binder, the kind Grandfather would have approved of. Each tab told part of our story, The original will, the vault survey, my tax receipts from before they'd vanished, and a timeline that laid bare every suspicious move Ryan and his crowd had made. Ever try to sleep when justice is sitting in your kitchen, waiting to be served? I managed maybe 2 hours, tops. But that was okay. I'd worked longer days on less rest during harvest. The petition itself wasn't fancy. Just straight facts lined up like fence posts. Here's the original survey. Here's the will. Here's proof I've been sole owner and taxpayer for decades. Then the punchline. Every document Ryan had used to steal my land was younger than my evidence and stank of forgery. The relief I wanted was simple too. Correct the record, restore my deed, and freeze any foreclosure nonsense until a judge could sort it out. I triple-checked everything before sliding it into a clean manila envelope. You don't get second chances with paperwork like this. The notarized survey rode shotgun in its rigid sleeve as I drove into town, precious as a newborn. Funny how a few sheets of old paper could feel heavier than a hay bale. The courthouse steps were still wet with dew when I hit the main counter at 8:55, early enough to catch the clerks before they got buried in their daily stack. I'd learned that much from watching how the place worked. Emergency hearing request, I said, sliding the petition across. We've got a 30-day foreclosure deadline coming up fast. The clerk, different one from yesterday, raised an eyebrow at the thickness of my filing, but started stamping anyway. Each chunk of the date stamp felt like a small victory. When she handed me my receipt copy, I checked every detail before tucking it away. Trust but verify, as grandfather used to say. Soon as I was back in my truck, I called Hank. He'd helped me structure the petition, knew how these hearings worked. Got it filed, I told him. Receipt shows they've got to schedule the hearing before day 30. Good, he said. Now let's rehearse your testimony. Start with the chain of title. We spent an hour going over it all. How the survey proved boundaries that hadn't changed since grandfather's time. How that trumped any recent rezoning, especially rezoning based on forged signatures. I practiced explaining the timeline so even a board member could follow it. Remember, Hank said, match their index numbers when you present exhibits. Make it impossible for them to claim they're comparing apples to oranges. Made sense. The county lived and died by its own filing system. Using their numbers against them felt like poetry. By afternoon, my mind was spinning with legal terms and exhibit numbers. Needed something physical to do or I'd drive myself crazy waiting. The barn doors had been needing a fresh coat anyway. Might as well make myself useful. Paint fumes and honest work helped clear my head. Each stroke felt like covering up the old worry with something fresh and clean. I left the second coat for morning, figuring the sunrise calm would steady my hand better than sunset anxiety. Sleep came in fragments that night. Every time I dozed off, I'd jerk awake thinking I'd missed the hearing. The roosters finally caught me, staring at the ceiling, my good denim shirt still stiff with dried paint from yesterday's work. Dawn painted the sky the same blue I'd put on those barn doors. I checked my phone. No messages from the court yet about the hearing date. Day 28 glared from my planner like a storm front rolling in. The notarized survey sleeve sat in my passenger seat again as I drove toward town, strapped in like precious cargo. 2 days left before that foreclosure. Clock struck midnight. The board could drag their feet, try to run out the clock, or they could do their jobs and face the truth I'd handed them. Ever stand in front of a firing squad of pressed suits and polished nameplates? That's what facing the county board felt like. 7 faces lined up behind a curved desk, all trying their best to look bored instead of nervous. I'd worn my cleanest work shirt. Figured they should see exactly who they were dealing with. Members of the board, I started, laying out my documents with hands steadier than I felt. I'm here about a rezoning based on forged signatures and false claims. The words came out clear and strong, just like I'd practiced with Hank. I placed grandfather's notarized survey next to the recent rezoning paperwork. The contrast was striking. His careful hand versus their laser-printed lies. First, I said, I'd like the clerk to read aloud the notary commission number and date from the original survey. The clerk adjusted her glasses. Commission number 7249B, dated September 12, 1982. Seal and signature verified in our records. Now, I continued, please note the timestamps on the rezoning documents. Compare them to your posted office hours. She squinted at the papers. These show processing at 6:45 p.m. on March 15th of this year. Our office closes at 5 p.m. Sharp. A ripple went through the board members. One started writing rapidly on his legal pad. Next, I said, pulling out a stack of canceled checks. I'd like to demonstrate why that signature on the rezoning isn't mine. I laid them out in a row. Notice how I write my R, quick and straight. But the forged signature? I pointed to the rezoning form. That R has a loop that I've never used in my life. The county council, a sharp-faced woman in a charcoal suit, glanced toward the gallery. I didn't need to turn around to know she was looking at Ryan. His reflection in the window showed him sitting ramrod straight, like someone had replaced his spine with steel. "For the record," I said, pulling out one last document, "I'm submitting a formal complaint to the state bar regarding these forged signatures. These weren't just random papers. They were legal filings submitted under color of law." That got their attention. Bar complaints have a way of making lawyers nervous, especially when they involve fraud. "Given the evidence of forgery," I continued, "I'm requesting an immediate hold on any foreclosure or subdivision actions until the record can be corrected. We're on day 29 of a 30-day deadline that never should have existed." The board chair, a gray-haired man who looked like he'd rather be golfing, cleared his throat. "Does the county council have any objection to a temporary hold?" The sharp-faced woman shuffled some papers. "Given the irregularities in the filing times and the notary evidence, we won't oppose a brief stay." "Motion granted," the chair said, tapping his gavel. "We'll issue a written decision by close of business tomorrow." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Anything else, Mr. Whitaker?" "No, sir," I said, gathering my documents. "Thank you for your time." The sun hit me like a blast furnace when I pushed through the courthouse doors. I pulled out my phone and called Hank before I'd even reached my truck. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Got the hold," I said, climbing into the cab. "They'll decide tomorrow." "Good," he said. "Let paper hit paper. The bar complaint was a nice touch. That'll keep your cousin's lawyers up tonight." I pulled out my planner and stared at day 29. It's underlined dark as a boundary line on grandfather's survey. "How fast you think the bar will move on this?" "Fast enough," Hank said. "They don't take kindly to forged signatures on legal documents, especially when there's money involved." I thanked him and hung up, sitting for a moment in my truck with the AC blasting. One day left until the original deadline, but now we had their attention. And more importantly, we had proof that couldn't be erased or explained away. Dawn was just starting to crack when my phone buzzed. I'd been up since 4 anyway, watching shadows crawl across the kitchen ceiling. The voicemail notification made my hand shake a little as I pressed play. "Mr. Whitaker, this is Andrea Martinez from the State Bar Association's Ethics Division. We're acknowledging receipt of your complaint regarding fraudulent signatures on county rezoning documents. Given the time-sensitive nature and the property values involved, we've opened an expedited inquiry. You'll receive formal documentation by end of day." I played it twice more, letting each word sink in. You know that feeling when a weight you've been carrying suddenly shifts? Like that first deep breath after a long dive? Yeah, that's what it felt like. But sitting still wasn't an option. I'd go crazy watching the clock. So I grabbed my thermos and headed out to check fence lines. The morning air had that clean, almost metallic smell that comes right after a front moves through. Reminds me of how grandfather used to say weather was God's way of washing windows. 4 hours and 3 fence sections later, my phone chimed again. Email this time, subject line reading, immediate preservation order. My fingers felt thick as I tapped the screen. Pursuant to allegations of fraudulent filings, all banking transactions related to rezoning applications, immediate freeze on accounts pending verification of source documents. I had to lean against the truck to steady myself. They weren't just looking at papers anymore. They were following the money. And money always leaves tracks. Back at the house, my laptop showed a news alert from the county paper's website. There it was, right at the top. Family Land Fraud Probe Rocks County Office. And wouldn't you know it, they'd caught Ryan in the worst possible photo. Mid-blink, mouth half open, looking guilty as sin before anyone even said the word. The article mentioned multiple parties under investigation and possible criminal implications. The county board's decision landed in my inbox just after lunch. I had to read it 3 times to believe it. Based on original survey documentation and evidence of filing irregularities, the board hereby orders restoration of original deed subject to final confirmation of bar investigation findings. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial Hank's number. When he picked up, I just couldn't speak. The silence stretched out like a Sunday afternoon. "That good, huh?" he finally said. "Yeah. It came out rough, like I'd been gargling gravel." "Well then," he said, and I could hear him smiling. "I reckon those barn doors need their second coat." He was right. Work keeps a man steady when good news might float him away. So I hauled out the paint trays and got to it, watching the sun sink toward the tree line. The evening light turned everything copper. The fields, the weathered wood, even the fresh paint gleaming wet and perfect. Grandfather always said twilight was when the land showed its true colors. I was laying my brush across the paint tray when I heard it. Tires on gravel, coming up the lane. The sound made every muscle in my back go tight. I knew that engine note, the particular way it echoed off the barn wall. The cousin's sedan, kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop by the gate. Standing there, watching them through the settling dust cloud, I couldn't help but wonder. What would they say now? No forged papers to wave around. No county clerks to hide behind. Just them and me, and the truth, standing in the copper light of a day that had finally turned our way. The car doors opened with a sound like thunder in the quiet evening air. They stepped out, Ryan leading the way, and I noticed his golf shirt wasn't quite as crisp as usual. I didn't go out to meet them. Some conversations aren't worth having, especially when paper's about to do all the talking that matters. Instead, I watched through the barn door as they stood there for a good 5 minutes, shuffling their feet in the gravel. Finally, they got back in their car and left, taillights fading into the dusk like dying embers. First thing next morning, I drove to the county office with my certified copies tucked in a fresh manila envelope. The clerk's window was quiet, just the soft whir of the timestamp machine as each page got its official mark. Final record correction complete by 9:15 a.m. Simple as that. Back in my truck, I read through the confirmation letter twice. Deed stands as originally recorded. Rezoning actions void ab initio. Legal speak for never happened. Amazing how a few typed lines can wipe away months of scheming. My phone buzzed with an email from the state bar. The subject line alone made my coffee go cold. Notice of disciplinary action and criminal referral. Inside, words marched across my screen like soldiers. Forged signatures, ethical violations, immediate suspension, accounts frozen pending investigation, mandatory public notice. You ever watch a wall of dominoes fall? That's what happened next. By noon, the local paper had it splashed across their website. By dinner it was front-page news, complete with Ryan's photo and a detailed timeline of every crooked step they'd taken. Prominent family and land fraud scandal. The kind of headline that sticks to a name like tar. I remember grandfather telling me once that reputation was like morning dew. Takes forever to gather. Vanishes in an instant. The cousins were learning that lesson hard. Their law firms put them on leave. Their country club memberships got reviewed. Their clients started finding other offices to trust with their business. Turns out, people get nervous when their lawyer shows up in the paper for forging documents. But you know what? I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Maybe because the land was already telling me to look forward, not back. The evening before had brought a soft rain. Just enough to wash the air clean and settle the dust. Perfect weather for an early start. So at first light, I climbed up on my old John Deere. The metal seat was cool against my jeans, and the key turned with that familiar catch and click. I let it idle there, beside the barn, its rumble bouncing off those freshly painted doors. They gleamed back at me, clean red in the dawn light, straight and true as a promise kept. The boundary stakes waited like old friends as I made my first slow pass. Each one lined up exactly where grandfather's survey said they would. Iron pins driven deep, marking corners that had held firm through decades of seasons. I could almost see him there with his transit and chain, measuring twice, marking once, recording everything in that precise hand of his. Somewhere around the east pasture I cut the engine. Just sat there with one hand resting on the warm hood, watching morning mist lift off the fields like a curtain rising. The barn doors caught the new sun and threw it back, bright as justice. All around me, the land stretched out clean and clear. Every acre accounted for, every line drawn true. I pulled out grandfather's old survey from my jacket pocket, kept it close these days like a good luck charm. The paper had gone soft at the creases, but his words still stood sharp as the day he wrote them. My fingers traced the notary seal, thinking how something so small could carry so much weight. Overhead, the sky had rinsed itself to that deep October blue that makes every color below it sing. I couldn't help but hear grandfather's voice then, clear as if he was standing right there in the morning light. A man's roots outlast any storm.